Thanks very much, Jordan. But the first thing that affects employers and we're living in a climate where there's quite a lot of people for their own health and their relations, particularly those who are older or vulnerable, and also secondly economic fear. And because of the enforced shutdown and the ongoing nature of it, with it only easing gradually, many employers are worried about their survival. And there's almost a sense that because the government's bringing these extraordinary laws and can sort of do what it likes under a state of emergency, the same applies to sort of everyone. It's a world in which you don't operate normally. Employers often are making quite hasty and unlawful decisions, panic decisions, I'd call them. And I'm seeing it a lot in our work with both small, medium, and surprisingly with some large employers as well. So, for example, and the two most obvious examples are, we can't mention our clients, but who they are, but the people demand and decide that they're going to cut your hours in the pay. So they, for good reason, places, their businesses are in a real crisis. So they think that people should make a sacrifice as well, and that they just can't pay money out in wages when there's no income coming in. And so there's that unilateral decision making is one of the mistakes that's coming through, no consultation or agreement. And secondly, making staff redundant for good reasons, but not following a process. In some cases, and this has happened with some quite large employers as well, just send a letter out telling them that they're redundant and giving them their notice and their final pay. So, and that's obviously fatal as well. So the normal laws of the land still apply despite us being in a state of emergency. And I just wanted to say, I've got a couple of thoughts. General obligations that employers have. There's a statutory obligation of good faith, which means that people have to consult and to be responsive and communicative. So that's a statutory duty. You can't, just because there's an economic emergency, leave out that. That people have, and some of the large organisations will have policy documents that they want to follow. So those rights are there for people always, and the state of emergency doesn't remove them. The next thing I was going to say is just something about redundancies and how you do them. And if you've got, you have to have two elements to make someone redundant. A good reason, and there's certainly a good reason for people with the situation that many are in with their businesses being shut and they're getting no income. But you do need a good reason. And secondly, you have to follow a proper process. Now, the process involves giving a proposal to people for the redundancy, considering their feedback, and then making a decision in simple terms, and also exploring alternatives. And one of the things that people often come back with is alternatives to redundancy that there might be, and you need to consider them. And there's also, before you make someone redundant, look at redeployment or other possibilities. One of the things that you'd want to think about is the wage subsidy. That's something that is available to people, and it's probably a good reason for not making people redundant. If you didn't apply that, that might be a weakness in your process, and if you've got a very good reason, and you've got a good reason not to. But with the wage subsidy, you can, the recommendation is that you pay the full pay or 80% of the pay, but you have to at least give them the full amount of the subsidy, and that gets you through a period of 3 months. If you're cutting their pay, they have to agree, you have to consult with them, and they have to agree to it. But that's a big help for people. If someone's being made redundant, if there's a proposal to make someone redundant, and you know, in your family or and someone you know of, the advice would be to carefully consider the proposal and make suggestions that they might have, such as instead cutting hours, reducing their pay, taking extended leave. They might have a lot of suggestions that they can make that would help the employer survive. And but you must go through a proper process. Otherwise, they can raise a personal grievance within 90 days of whatever it is they're complaining about. And also, if someone who's facing redundancy, you should support them and encourage them to use their employee assistance program if they've got one, or what other support there is around that could help them. The other thing about redundancy is that if the business is going to continue into the future, you probably don't want to lose your staff, and you're better, I mean, they're your most present asset, one of your most precious. You want to keep them if you can, and the alternative sort of things that I flagged that might be possible mean that you may be able to keep them and get through this period of time without actually losing them. There are quite a few questions that you had, and I've got some thoughts on them, Jordan, but you may want to ask them yourself rather than me just go through them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll just run through obviously some of the list of questions we had at the start, and if anyone else has any of the questions, obviously send them through to me. But some of the questions we had obviously initially there is, I suppose if you were to touch on this, but for businesses that are struggling or don't have enough work on, is there any way just to sort of reduce the salaries or hours of employees sort of immediately?
Yeah, there is, but you have to get their agreements. So the starting point is you have to avoid this panic approach that some people have, and you just have to talk to the workers. People aren't silly. They see that you're going through a crisis as an employer, and 90% of people, if not, but there's always one or two that won't, but most people will come to agreement with you, such as reducing salaries or hours, because they want to keep their job as well. It's not a good climate for people. So yes, you get their agreement, and you can give them a if you want to, in your form, or you can give them a copy of the employment agreement and tell them that they're entitled to take advice and so on. But the key thing is just to talk to them and see if they'll agree. It's only when you get a number that won't agree that you might then be looking at making them redundant or making some of the positions redundant if you can't get enough agreement. But yeah, that's the way to do it.
If your organisation is sort of not receiving revenue at the time, or it's obviously got like severely reduced revenue, and is likely to obviously stay that way going forward, even once lockdown rules have been lifted, is it better to sort of start the redundancy process early rather than opt in for the wage subsidy? Or is it better?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a business question, perhaps more than a legal one. So you need to look at whether the wage subsidy is going to get you through. If it's only going to put off the evil day, you may not want to buy into that, because it means you keep staff for the 3 months of the subsidy, and you may want to go the more brutal road of redundancy. But I suppose the other thing is that if you get the wage subsidy, there'll be further support from government, one would expect, and you may want to see what else comes up at the end of that. It's the wage subsidies seems to be designed to keep people in work for the period of the lockdown, of the expected lockdown, I suppose, but they'll have other support packages, one would expect, at the other end. But it's a business decision, and it's not an easy one, and you'd have to make a call yourself as a business person.
Yeah. Just another question in here from one of the viewers, obviously. In the Great Depression, groups like teachers agreed on a school-by-school basis to share the total reduced staff wage so that everybody could keep their jobs. Is this an example of a possible alternative option that staff might be able to come up with?
Yeah, I suppose excuse me, it'd be yes, I suppose it is. You have to still comply with your minimum obligations of minimum wage payments like that. And so you've got to just be careful about it as the employer. But I suppose you could just pay it as per normal, and they could then redistribute it themselves, and that's an easy. People are perfectly entitled to do that. If it was done that way, it will be easier for the employer, I guess. So yeah.
Okay. And if a business has taken the subsidy, are they obviously obligated to maintain the employment for the staff they claimed it for the 3 months, assuming that they pay more than the subsidy by a margin? So they are?
Yes, they are obliged to keep the staff on for 3 months. There was a date when the law was, and I'm just trying to find that date. But the if you took applied for the subsidy after a certain date, which might be the 27th of March, but I'm guessing. But there was a date when they changed it. Earlier on, it was more waffly. But after that date, they made it plain that if you take the subsidy, you have to keep the people on for the period of the subsidy, for the whole time that they're paid the subsidy. And you can't just make them redundant part way through and pocket the subsidy. But earlier on, it was vaguer. And so yeah. But you can negotiate with them that their wages are reduced down to the worst, the subsidy level itself, but 80% the recommended cut that the government has in its policy.
What would you say is a reasonable consultation period in this sort of current climate?
Well, it wouldn't be that long. A minimum of 2 or 3 days, but if you can give people a bit longer, that would be better. But it just depends. It'll be governed partly by the crisis the business is facing, and if it's severe, well, 2 or 3 days, I guess.
If you are an essential worker, but you have sort of vulnerable people in your bubble, can your employer ask or basically request that you work? And what are the remedies for that, I suppose?
So if you've got, I looked at that, you've sent that interview. There's if you're an essential worker and you've got vulnerable people in your bubble, can the employer ask you to work? And the short answer is yes, they can. But you've got to just be sensitive to the world that people are in. It's not an easy world, and you've got to ensure your employees' health and safety as an employer, but not their bubbles. And you can apply for what the government brought in, an essential workers leave subsidy, where workers who have vulnerable people in their bubble are not wanting to work. So there is a subsidy there to help with that very situation. And some employers are offering discretionary leave, or paid or unpaid, to try and help people out in that situation. But if you're an essential worker, you've sort of talked it through and that, but you still need them to work, you can require them to.
Have you found yourself and your organisation really becoming a whole lot busier as a result of the current crisis and sort of the confusion? Really?
Well, it's sort of steady. It's the steady work. It's makes different to normal work because it's sort of reactive work, a lot of it, where things have gone wrong. So it's probably, as William told me, I'm better to be an employment lawyer than a restaurateur in Wellington, and I think he's quite wise. Yeah, no, there's a steady flow of work. There are a lot of problems, and they'll be ongoing. It's just going to keep going, but it's affected by people's fear of their economic survival. They're reluctant. If they lose their job, it's a different thing. They've got nothing to lose. But if they've still got links to work, people are a bit reluctant to burn their bridges with their workplace as well. So there's a bit of a climate of fear out there, and people are unsure of how it's going to all end for them. They'll hold on to their work.
If sort of a business is obviously a bit of a downturn as well, are you able to make staff redundant, I suppose, with the intention of rehiring them once business picks up again?
It's an unusual question because I've never struck that, but probably technically yes. There's two things I'd say about it though. Firstly, it runs the risk of casting a doubt on the genuineness of the redundancy. So you've got to bear that in mind. If you, look, if you just make them redundant and tell them that you're hoping to take them on again sometime in the future when things pick up, that's fine. But the risk is that they'll find other work, and so you need to bear that in mind, and that's the end of them. So if you're hoping to keep a link with your valued staff, but you've got not much money to pay them or no money to pay them, yes, you can make them redundant, but you can't do I don't think you can do a conditional redundancy that they're redundant for 3 months or 5 months and then they're back on the payroll. That's not really, I think we'd struggle with that. But yeah, you can make them redundant and tell them you hope to take them back when things change and the business is back on its feet. You could do it like that. Yeah, but the risk is that they're not going to, people aren't going to sit on their hands for 3 months with no money. If they can find a job, they'll grab it.
Yeah. What do you think sort of might be sort of the opinion of people regarding, obviously there's a general culture, I suppose, of a lot of workplaces of coming in when you're sick or with a minor cold or, you know, coming in the tail end of a flu. Do you think that that sort of attitude will continue in the future following this?
No, I think that people won't, not only the employer, but other workers won't like it. They'll be much more antagonistic to the people that they've tolerated who've come in with a bit of flu. And the other thing that may well change, and I suspect it will, is that I think a lot more people will want to work from home anyway, and that these vast floors of office workers may not be so full in the future. You may find, and I was talking to a firm of professionals earlier this week, and they're wanting to just have a meeting room and 2 or 3 offices that they can use instead of I think they've got 2 floors now, but a small number of meeting rooms and a small number of offices, and basically work from home. So I think it'll be easier to encourage people to work from home accordingly if they're office type workers with laptops and computers in their home. But no, I don't think people will put up that. That'll be just it'll be too, they'll find it too threatening.
Bit of a question here for Susan, saying that in this current environment, obviously this is incredibly stressful for employees with job, not being unsure about job certainty, but also from the perspective of an employer who is obviously quite nervous on basically, business, the business's going concern. What advice can you give sort of employers basically to stay, to sort of de-stress and stay calm, I suppose, during this period?
I suppose during the Thirsty Thursday drinks, but seriously, I don't know what you can say, because you're right. The employers have a huge amount of stress. I've got one guy that I know quite well who's got runs quite a good, two actually, like this, who run clothing shops that are very, very successful, and they just think that they're getting huge bills coming in, clothing still coming in for the next season. They've got no income, and if you think the workers are worried, which they are, some of the, and there's 2 like that, employers are, just can't see how they're going to get through it. It is a huge stressful time, and I suppose the serious answer is that they need to talk about it and not just bottle it up. And if need be, talk to one of the counselling services that are there, and maybe a business advisor. I'd talk to people and try and get some help and guidance. Would be the sensible road to go down. But it is a huge pressure. I just see it in people, even just going out for a walk along the parade where I live. You meet a few of them, and I'll get desperate emails I've had from people. Someone sent me an email asking for the names of 3 people I could give him that he could ring and ask for keep his business going and buy his product. So I gave him William's name, but was reluctant to go any further. But no, but someone, it's a true story. Someone did do that, and it seemed like desperation.
I bought all his stock.
It wasn't chocolate. No, but it struck me as to the extraordinary time that we're living in for small businesses. It's a those guys were really worried. Yeah.
One question that I sort of had I've just thought of it now, so I apologize it's not properly worded, I suppose. But how do you see, I suppose, the situation with a lot of our, horticulture and basically a lot of our workforce that relies on seasonal workers coming in on overseas work visas, with the country being shut down, who will fill these jobs? Who will fill these roles? In your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question, and there's two to view on it. Some sections of the Labour Party take the view that, well, it should be New Zealanders and just have to pay more money. But I don't think the horticultural people see it like that. And I know Business New Zealand has been saying that they're going to have to, when we move on a little bit, relax the immigration because it's so much relies on seasonal workers from overseas. So you've got the two arguments. The horticultural people will be saying for the kiwi fruit or whatever it is, they need seasonal workers from countries, Philippines, Samoa, wherever they're coming from. And there's a resentment on the part of some in the Labour Party to think, oh, you're just getting cheap labour from overseas, and if you're paid a decent wage, New Zealanders would do it. But of course, the second view won't survive in this climate, even if it's, regardless of what you think about it normally, because people are just struggling to survive, I suspect. And a lot of, for example, I think flowers are just being thrown out right now. It's getting the produce that people are making, getting workers in to do the work they have to, but start getting it overseas and selling it as well. So, yeah, it's a big issue, isn't it? But I heard Business New Zealand saying that, and I think Phil O'Reilly said it at a Zoom meeting I was on the same thing, that it's important to be aware of the need to let people to come in and work on those crops and things to get the agriculture going.
We do have another question here saying the 70 plus age group is potentially maybe in lockdown all the way until we're at level 1. There are obviously human rights legislation preventing discrimination. What do you believe about essentially getting the section of workforce?
What do I believe about which? About whether it's fair to lock. It will become a recommendation rather than mandatory, I suppose. I think at level 3 it's more recommendations, whereas level 4 it seems stricter. So I think it will be more an encouragement, and if you want to go out, you probably you can. I think once we get to level 3, there's going to be a loosening up of the economy and more people will get around. So I think it'll really be ultimately. I don't think there'll be a regulation or a law saying it's illegal not to leave your home other than for a walk if you're over 70. So I think that you'll, if you decide to do it, so be it. But they're saying that the reason for it is that people over 70 are more likely to die if they get coronavirus than younger people. We know that's the argument. So you take a bigger risk, don't you?
I see Denise has her hand raised. Take it away.
Thanks, John. It was really just a clarification of that question, Peter. I think the question was not so much about the generality of advice to the over 70s to stay home or to stay in isolation. It was the question of, in a sense, what are the rights of 70-year-olds who may still be in work, and I guess whose employer either wishes them to go home when they don't want to go home, or alternatively wishes them to be at work when they don't want to be at work. So it's where does it fit in an employment sense?
Yeah, that's I hadn't thought of it like that. If the employer wants you to go home when you want to work, I suppose you'd look at the question of, can you work from home? If you can't, I think there are exemptions. I've got the human rights legislation in front of me, but there are exemptions for, I think, for health type things in it. I'd need to get back to someone after having a look at the act to see exactly what it said. And I suppose the other thing is there's also the health and safety legislation to bear in mind. If you could bring someone in, are you putting their health at risk? And it depends how much, whether we've stamped out the virus, whether that's a real risk or not, doesn't it? There'd be a lot of things to think about. And yes, there are rights. The 70-year-old who works and wants to go to work has rights as well. So I don't think it's probably not straightforward, because you'd have to look at the exact the exemptions in the human rights legislation, and I can't remember what they are. And you'd also have to look at your health and safety obligations. But through discussion, you'd probably reach some sort of sensible agreement. Workplaces are going to have to change, as you're probably all realising, because we've talked about this with our staff. What will the workplace look like when we go back? Because we're going to go back, and at some stage, and you have to separate people out, people who you might work shift work. There are things that can be done to better protect people. And I think the 70-year-old, the older workers who are more vulnerable are going to be, they'll be a factor in that as well. I think it's sort of talking it through and working out what's safe for people. So we've got some people that will want to work from home some of the time, so there's not too many in the office at the same time. And I think if there's a very good and safe work environment created, it's easier for the older people, the 70-year-olds and the older people, to work there. But that's not straightforward. So do you let people, like in our law firm, we have the door open and people just come in to the desk? You keep the door shut and wait outside. How do you manage what they touch? Who cleans it? There's all sorts of things that have to be worked through, and of which the rights and the safety of the older people would be part of it.
What is your sense of the union's approach been during this crisis?
I think the unions are pragmatic and sensible in the main. Yep. And if they think that their members are being treated with respect and are being listened to and consulted, and that decisions that are taken are sort of inevitable, if you like, they're realistic, they live with that. But by the same token, they'll do what they can to protect their people, but they're not stupid. It's a crisis in the world and in our country, and you can't, by a strong argument, overcome the reality. It's a very real problem, and it needs everybody's cooperation to get through it. The main thing is to treat your people with kindness. It's when people panic, and it's a human reaction, but some people do. And it's when you've got that panic and you've got those sort of unilateral decisions where you're not really talking to people and listening to them. That's when things off fails, and that's when people go to unions or take cases for grievances.
For the non-essential workers that are working from home, levels 4 and 3, what is the perspective on basically your home working setup? Obviously not being ideal for health and safety perspective. Obviously not having an ergonomic chair and a good desk and everything like that. What are the rules around that?
It's a good question. And employers have obligations for their employees, whether they're working at home or in the office. So the mere fact they're working at home doesn't obviate those obligations. But you need to talk to them about that. Some of our workers took their ergonomic chairs home, but you do have to be, particularly if this drags on, you need to ask people about their backs, necks, how they're coping. Is their setup appropriate? You may need to help to get some guidance. There are physiotherapists who go and visit offices. They're not going to go and visit the homes, but they have leaflets that set out how you should sit and the height the screen should be from where you are and things like that. And I think an employer ought to, I'm talking about office workers, which is not everybody, of course, that's just what I'm used to. But I think you should get that sort of information and circulate it among your staff at the very least. But yeah, so I presume you are thinking of office workers when you're talking of working from home, but those things are on my mind anyway, because you can do it for a little while, a month maybe, but if it goes on beyond that for a longer period of time, you will start getting bad necks and backs and things being put out, and they become real issues with the passage of a reasonable amount of time, and I think you have to turn your mind to that.
This is sort of a little bit similar question we've had previously, but sort of a bit more in depth maybe, is just what are the rights of people such as like teachers who don't want to be put at risk as a result of being around 30 or plus children in a day sort of thing. Are they obligated to go back when the school is open? They must work.
I would think they probably do. You could if the school's open, the school has to put in place safe practices. I think they have guidelines from the Ministry of Education limiting the number of kids who can be in close proximity is up to 10 or something. They've got their own little pods and things. But if that's your job, you can refuse to work if your health's at risk. But it has to be well grounded. It's not just because you feel it's at risk. It has to be. I wrote this up before I came. Let me see if I can find it. But it has to be real, not just in your mind. So I think you can be made to work. Yes. Under the Health and Safety Act, an employee has the right to cease and refuse to carry out work if they believe that carrying out the work would expose them or any other person to a serious risk to their health and safety. But the risk must arise from an immediate or imminent exposure to a hazard. That's the sort of objective. So it's not just because you're a person and you panic quickly and you're terrified of getting sick. That's not a good enough reason, I don't think. But the other side of the coin is that people's frailties will be looked at sympathetically if anything goes to the Employment Relations Authority. There'll be a sympathy for people's fears. So you need to be sensitive about how you handle those things, and if you can make some accommodation with them, I suppose you try to. But it's a bit hard if you just don't want to. That's your job, and they're paying you for it. So, or the taxpayer is, and you can't just for reasons related to your own personality, not work.
Would there be any, I suppose, ambiguity within the Act, considering that, COVID-19 can be asymptomatic for a certain period, so you may, the hazard may be present, but it's not obvious?
Seems a bit of a long shot, though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's the long shot. No, everyone is working on that basis.
No. Yeah.
The doctors might say that.
So what is the extent of the employer's health and safety obligations when the employees are working from home? If the employer audit basically the working from home arrangements, is it up for the employee to say, I've got a good workspace and it's fine, or is the employer responsible for ensuring that their employees do have a proper workspace from home?
I don't think the employer is expected to visit your home. They'd be breaking your bubble if they did. So they can't. I think their obligation, the thing that they ought to do, I think, is to ask you about your health, ask you about your workstation, whether it's causing you problems. And as I said earlier, I would get those leaflets that there's people who run these sorts of practice, physiotherapists who have diagrams of the position of the chair and the screen and exercises for your hand and taking breaks. There are things that can be provided and easily obtained by an employer that should be given to the staff to just make sure they're okay. Particularly if it goes, if you're working at home beyond the next week.
Fantastic. I think we have caught up to all the questions. If anyone's got any final questions, I'll make the allowance for you to unmute yourself and fire them away.
I just got one question for Peter. Quite a lot of the time when you were giving your presentation, you were looking up into the sky. Were you looking for divine intervention or what?
I was. No, it's because I've got a screen here. I did some work on this before we did it, and I've got I'll show you. It's
wow,
I've got a range of computers. So I wanted to just prepare myself with the sort of things that might come up and write some ideas up and go to the legislation and those notices that the government's issued, and to some extent the Ministry of Health has on those on some of these points. So as I put here, I haven't needed, but just handy to have it.
So Peter prepared it, so it must be divine.
No, I think I've been abandoned, reliant on William's intervention now.
Jordan, I had a question that might be better directed at Roger Miller, I'm not sure. I was just wondering if in either Peter or Roger's experience, are there any particular issues coming out in terms of Māori employment?
I have to say I haven't had any, excuse me, I haven't had any specific racial or ethnic inquiries at this point. I have to say the biggest difficulty I've had is landlords unilaterally just saying they're taking rent reduction, or tenants against landlords saying they're just unilaterally taking huge rent reductions and leaving some of these landlords in dire straits. Everyone has been thinking about the employees, but not often about the landlords. I have a question for you, Peter, if I may. What if an employer gets into good times within that 12-week period, so their income is back to normal? Do they have to pay back any of the wage subsidy?
That's not entirely clear, and I think there'll be some further guidelines on that, because part of because you can apply for the subsidy if you predict you're going to have a lesser income, so it's a guess. And so I'm not sure. I don't think they've said what happens if you predict wrongly, and I think there'll be further guidance given further down the track about the question you've asked. That they're going to audit it in case people have told porkies in their forms and said that their income in a month that they know already was less than it actually was, which is a different question to what you're asking. The problem with it is you guess income, you predict your income, and if that doesn't actually happen, do you have to pay the money back? It's not clear, but maybe you will. I don't know. I think they'll I think they'll refine that that issue further down the track. But you haven't done anything wrong if you've guessed wrongly, and you're certainly entitled to, on the basis of your guess, of your prediction, get the subsidy. But yeah, it's a good issue that many people will be thinking about, because some people have fared better than they were afraid they might. Yeah, and with Māori and that, there's a I don't have sort of specific employment examples, but I know that my cousin's husband is the person on the central committee of whatever that runs this, and his responsibility is for what's called disadvantaged groups, which I thought originally might be rest homes, but it includes Māori and Pacifica. And so there's subsidies going out there to focus on them. And the other thing I've noticed with those groups is that there's a stronger communal response. It's not an employment, but in terms of distributing food and that. I've got, there's a family I know who are quite high, they're both quite high up in the government bureaucracy, but they've got a home in the Wairarapa, and I know there's a lot of food being dropped around among whānau, if you like. So there's perhaps I've noticed more of a communal response to people in need, if that's any use to them.
Fantastic. Looks like we...
No, Jordan, if I can just say there, we're wearing another hat there, which is my role with the charities. And we had a board meeting last week on Friday. It's been amazing, the number of the charitable sector and entities that have really had to step up over the last few weeks. And a number of charities have been certainly doing a great job out there. But their concern is that their income has been reduced. And, you know, just on that, if I can give a plug for the RSA, who weren't able to have their Poppy Day last week, but going on, so I'll just stand up a little bit, and if you can, there we are.
Good on you, Roger.
All the best.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. We have come almost up to obviously 5 p.m. So good, so relatively good timekeeping on the session. Thank you very much, Peter, for your thoughts and insights today. Incredibly sort of enlightening and more relevant than ever, I think, obviously in today's climate. With coming up, we do have, obviously this will be a reoccurring session, as I most know. Next week, we're looking to have Chris Collins and Chris Parkin and Grant Highway, who's the director at my organisation, to discuss the perceived or the sort of prediction to the future for commercial property. Peter's touched on that briefly today with his prediction, obviously with a lot of people requiring a lot less space. So very interesting to see the different viewpoints and how people think the market will be in 12 and 24 months time. So please make sure you dial in for that session there. Denise is raising her hand, so Denise, unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just the promo for Monday. On Monday, we have Dr. Stephen Clark, who is the historian who is writing the Rotary Centenary History. And he's going to be speaking on the topic of Rotary, what did you do in the war and other times of crisis? And he's drawing on the history, the stories that he's compiled about Rotary in the 1930s and then in the early 1940s, as to how Rotary helped the country weather the storms associated with the Depression and then the Second World War. And he'll be doing that with an aim to distilling some of the learnings that we might think about today. So I think it will be a really interesting session, and at the usual time, 12:30 Monday. Thank you, Jordan. Advertisement over.
No worries. Yes, so I suppose, yeah, thank you all for coming along. Yeah, please tune in on Monday and tune in on Thursday. Additionally, there are many people here who are experts in their fields that I may not have reached out to yet. If you are an expert and you've got a lot to share, we've got a platform for you to share it on. So don't be shy, don't be modest. Tell me how great you are. We'll put you in front of all these wonderful people, and you can say your piece and educate your fellow Rotarians.